Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my initial review of the Canon RF 70-200mm f2.8L IS USM Z. That's a lot of letters. A high-end telephoto zoom for EOS R mirrorless cameras and corrected for full-frame sensors. I spent some time with an early shooting sample for this review, and I can tell you right now the barrel doesn't extend and it can now take teleconverters. Announced in October 2024 and costing around £3,600, dollar price linked in description, it becomes the second 70-200 2.8L in the native RF mount, but you'll notice this isn't a Mark II model. The older 2019 version remains on sale at a lower price of around $2,800 or around £3,000, while the new zoom joins a growing number of hybrid lenses optimized for both photo and video. In Canon's world, a hybrid zoom means having a declicked aperture ring, minimal focus breathing, and fast smooth focusing, but also a unified size and design first seen with the RF 24-105 2.8L almost 1 year earlier. Oh, and also a Z in the title. But don't worry if you're only into taking photos and don't care about video, just think of it as their latest and greatest 70-200 2.8L. So what's new over the original RF 70-200? Well, apart from the aperture ring and reduced breathing, the two biggest physical changes are an internal zoom and the chance to use both the RF 1.4 and 2x teleconverters. Now, when the first RF 70-200 2.8L, as seen here, was launched in October 2019, it redefined how small this kind of lens could be. An extending barrel allowed it to start at just 146mm long, making it 53mm shorter than the previous EF version, and at just over a kilogram it was almost half a kilo lighter. But the design prevented the use of teleconverters, making it a deal breaker for some, and despite Canon's assurances over sealing, there were still some inevitable concerns over the integrity of an extending barrel. Now, I've not personally experienced dust or moisture issues with this lens, but I know a lot of people will feel more reassured by a traditional internal zoom. Well, now you have that option in the native RF mount. Okay, so let's get started. Here's the new 70-200 2.8L Z on the right, alongside the 24-105 2.8L Z on the left. And the first thing you'll notice is they share exactly the same size, shape and controls. This is the unified design I was talking about. No, unlike the 24-105, the 70-200 is also available in black or white finishes, the former more discreet, the latter more effectively managing heat. Here's the 24-105 mounted via its built-in tripod collar and foot, and now let's switch it for the new 70-200, where you can see it looks essentially identical other than the labelling. Switching back and forth between them also lets you compare the finish. Which would you go for? And for comparison, here's the original RF 70-200 2.8L, which again at 146mm shaves 53mm from the length of the new version, although they do become similar in overall length when that older model is zoomed to 200mm. They're also almost identical in weight, with only 40 grams between them. In terms of controls, the 70-200 Z is exactly the same as the 24-105 Z, so you start closest to the mount with 4 switches, a focus limiter offering the full range or 2.5 meters to infinity, switches to enable or disable the autofocus and stabilization, and finally one to set 3 stabilization modes such as panning. Like the 24-105, the new 70-200 comes with a built-in collar and a removable tripod foot, which allows the barrel and body to rotate within, although annoyingly without notches to feed back those 90-degree intervals. To be fair, neither does Sony on its equivalent lens. Instead, you'll just need to visually line up markings on their barrels. The foot features 2 different tripod threads and a locking pin, but you'll notice, again like the Sony, the base resists adopting an arc dovetail. But since the foot is removable, accessories may become available, not to mention shareable with the 24-105, which I believe has exactly the same collar. Next comes a permanently declicked aperture ring, which turns smoothly and quietly and is designed for discrete adjustments while filming video. Or you can set it to the lockable A position for traditional body-based control. But like all 5 of Canon's hybrid lenses to date, the aperture ring can't be used when taking photos with most bodies. It'll work fine in video, but if you want to use it when taking photos, you'll need a body from 2024 onwards, like an R5 II or an R1. I do hope that firmware updates may allow at least some key older bodies to play along, but there's no sign of that yet. That said, most Canon owners won't really mind since they've been controlling apertures via their bodies since EOS was launched in the late 80s. And if you really want a clicky aperture control on the Canon barrel, you can always assign it to the RF control ring at the end, so maybe I'm being unnecessarily picky. What do you think? So, moving on, there's a wide zoom ring with a 70-degree throw between 70 and 200mm. Also notice the indented grooves beyond the 200mm mark, which are designed to mate with optional powered zoom accessories. The PZE2 and PZE2B, introduced with the 24-105 Z, use gearing to physically turn the zoom ring and now work on both of these hybrid zooms. Both can operate under the camera's battery power, but if you connect an external USB-C supply, you'll reduce the consumption while also allowing faster speeds. Meanwhile, the PZE2B version also sports a 20-pin port for connecting to broadcast grips, but both can also be operated by configuring buttons on models like the C70, R5 and R5C. Next come two focus hold buttons, followed by a free spinning manual focusing ring, which like most mirrorless lenses is motor assisted, but at least turns very smoothly here. And finally, the customizable clicky RF control ring at the end, which again can be assigned to operate the aperture if you're missing a clicky adjustment from the lens barrel. At the end is an 82mm filter thread, again shared between the two hybrid zooms so far, and a bayonet for the hood as seen earlier. This cylindrical hood has a rubber tip to allow you to more easily stand it up facing down, and a sliding blind to access rotating filters. Like the 24-105 Z, the 70-200 Z features optical stabilization, with Canon claiming 7.5 stops of compensation with bodies that do have IBIS, or 5.5 for those that don't. Like all L lenses, there's a metal mount and dust and moisture resistance, including a rubber grommet. But what makes it really exciting is you can now fit either of the two RF teleconverters on the end, such as the 1.4 times seen here. And to dispel any potential gotchas right now, you can still enjoy the full optical zoom range without any obstructions. This, along with the internal zooming, could be enough to sell the lens to many. Focusing is taken care of by dual nano USM motors, providing quick, quiet and smooth operation. You can see it in action here on the R5 II at 70mm 2.8, where it's pulling focus almost instantly between the bottle and background. And now at 200mm 2.8, where it's still very quick. This makes it great for responding to fast action. It's also capable of more leisurely focus pulls in video, again filmed here using the R5 II at 70mm 2.8. As it pulls focus, also notice the minimal breathing, and this is being achieved optically here without any digital compensation. Turning to a mostly human subject, here's how it looks tracking me across the frame with the lens at 70mm 2.8. As I move around, you can not only see the almost complete absence of focus breathing, but also the potential for background blur. And now at 200mm 2.8, where again the tracking works well. It's a perfect workhorse range for weddings, events, and close-range sports or wildlife. Moving on to stills, here's my distant landscape scene, angled as always so that details run into the corners. This was taken on the R5 II with the lens at 70mm 2.8. Now this lens again was an early sample, but I'm told it's reflective of the quality you can expect. Taking a close look in the middle reveals a tremendous amount of crisp detail right out of the gate, and closing it a stop to f4 proves this lens was already operating at or close to its best when wide open. So back to the 2.8 sample, before heading into the far corner, where those details remain crisp with no evidence of any aberrations to complain about. Close the aperture stop to f4 and pixel peepers may notice a fractional boost in contrast, but to be honest, this lens is already looking great at 70mm 2.8 across the frame and right into the corners. Now let's try out the long end of the range at 200mm, where Canon claims the quality is slightly improved over the already very respectable RF 70-200 2.8L. Taking a close look in the middle again reveals very crisp details with no complaints, and closing the lens one stop to f4 again proves it's already operating at or close to its best when wide open. So let's return to the 2.8 sample and head into the far corner, where again the details remain really sharp without any complaints to mention. As I close the aperture, you can again see there's little to be gained in terms of sharpness, proving you'd only really be closing it down to achieve a greater depth of field or to balance the exposure. This performance bodes very well for teleconverter use, so let's have another look at a 200mm sampler f2.8 before swapping it for one with the RF 1.4 times TC fitted, again with the aperture wide open, but now is transformed into a 280mm f4. Now let's take a close look in the middle of those pictures with the bare 70-200 on the left and with the 1.4 times teleconverter fitted on the right. In each case, the aperture was wide open, so you're looking at 200mm f2.8 on the left and two 80mm f4 on the right. If you pixel peep, you'll see the teleconverter really is resolving finer details than the bare lens was, proving that the optics in the zoom can deliver more than just a magnified view. I look forward to trying it out with the 2x converter, but right now it's looking very promising. Okay, now for a stills portrait starting at 70mm 2.8, where you can get an idea of the potential for background blur. Obviously not as much as a brighter prime lens could, but still very well behaved with no busyness to distract you. And if you take a closer look, you'll see there's very crisp details on the focused areas. And now at 200mm 2.8, where it's clearly possible to remove any distracting backgrounds with the tighter coverage and substantial blur. The bokeh here is also looking very smooth, but again, taking a closer look proves there's very crisp details in those focused areas. Again, 70 to 200 2.8s have long been the workhorse choice of event photographers, and these shots prove just how good the new Canon is at portraiture. For a more detailed look at bokeh and rendering, here's my close-up ornament test, this time shot at 200mm 2.8 from the minimum focusing distance of 68cm. Note that if you zoom to the 70mm focal length, the closest focusing distance becomes 49cm. Here you can see the giant bokeh blobs that are possible with a longer lens at close range, and as you can see they're also very well behaved with no outlining or textures to complain about. As I gradually close the aperture, you can see the blobs taking on a more uniform shape across the frame, and there's only a mild hint at the 11-blade diaphragm system behind the scenes. And until I test a fully final production sample, that's all I can say so far, but as I wrap up, I'm going to share some bursts of Steven Seagal and friends tearing around the Brighton seafront, and as a bonus, these were all taken using the lens with the 1.4x teleconverter, and they're all uncropped. When Canon launched their first RF 70 to 200 2.8L, we all marvelled at the size, portability and the quality, but many photographers simply ruled it out straight away on its inability to use teleconverters, coupled with concerns over sealing with that extending barrel. With this new version, Canon's addressed both issues with a more traditional design, while also sporting their latest technologies. In my test so far, it's extremely sharp across the frame and throughout the range, even wide open at f2.8, and there's genuinely extra detail to be resolved with the TCs. Focusing is almost instant even with the teleconverters, and thanks to the hybrid status in the range, it's also almost bereft of focus breathing. By sharing the same design as the 24-105 2.8, it'll also work with the same motorized zoom adapters, and like that model, it additionally sports a dedicated aperture ring. But like all 5 of their hybrid lenses to date, this aperture ring is non-clickable and mostly designed for video use. Recent bodies may also be able to use it for photos, but it feels a bit odd not having the clicked operation, and to be honest, I think most Canon photographers will just stick to body-based controls when shooting stills. Ultimately, it becomes their best 70 to 200 2.8 to date, and some may interpret it as Canon backpedaling a bit over their previous decisions, but remember, it's not a Mark II version that replaces the earlier model. The original RF 70 to 200 2.8 remains on sale at a slightly lower price for those who value greater portability over the use of TCs, and I'm glad to still see it in the lineup, but equally, I know a lot of Canon owners will be very happy to see this new version. Which only leaves me to ask you what you think in the comments. Has Canon made the right decision? Which version do you prefer? And is the operation of the aperture ring even an issue for you? Thanks as always for watching. Please do consider subscribing to my channel if you like what I do here, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.